You don't belong here. This is private property. Private? Lady, I am the property. Every single inch you're standing on, including that $4 million palace you call home, belongs to M.E. I'm Dakota Reed, and what I'm about to tell you isn't just my story. It's a warning about what happens when greed meets wilderness, when power collides with truth. Stay with me, because by the end, you'll understand why silence is sometimes the most dangerous thing you can choose. The sky over Montana stretched endless and blue the way it used to when Uncle Garrett would point at the horizon and say, "That's God painting." I stood where the old cabin once was, timber and 73 years of memories, looking down at Silver Creek Lake shimmering in early morning light. Everything should have been exactly as I remembered. The silence so thick you could hear your heartbeat. But something was catastrophically wrong. Far to the east, where the shoreline curved into that perfect crescent Garrett called the Heron's Bend, concrete and glass caught the sun. A structure that had zero business existing on land my family had protected since 1951. I was 17 when my parents died on black ice outside Missoula. Garrett took me in without hesitation. My dad's older brother, a man who'd spent his entire adult life on this ranch, who'd refused developer offers that would have made him wealthy, who believed land wasn't property you owned, but a legacy you protected. He taught me to read rock layers along the lake bed, how glaciers carved this valley 12,000 years ago, how water moved through limestone and shale in patterns you could predict if you understood geology. Those summers working beside him, mapping terrain, testing soil, learning to see Earth as something alive and interconnected, those were the years that shaped who I became. A geologist. Someone who understood that beneath every surface, deeper truths waited to be discovered. Garrett used to sit on the porch at sunset with whiskey and tell stories about our grandfather, the man who'd bought this land with railroad money, who'd planted the first pines along the northern border, who'd promised this place would stay wild. My uncle kept that promise. He refused every offer, every pitch from developers who saw the lake and imagined vacation homes, luxury communities, profit margins. I remember one evening when I was maybe 19, a man in an expensive suit drove all the way out here pitching some resort concept. Garrett listened politely, then said no so firmly the man never returned. After he left, Garrett turned to me. There'll always be people who want to take what isn't theirs. People who see beauty and think ownership, who mistake power for right. When that time comes, you'll need to remember where the property documents are. And Dakota, never, ever give up what's rightfully yours. The call came on a Wednesday in February. Garrett had died of a heart attack in his sleep. 76 years old, alone in the cabin he'd lived in for half a century. The funeral was small. Me and a handful of elderly neighbors who spoke quietly about what a good man he'd been, how he'd helped during brutal winters, never asking anything in return. The lawyer read the will in a cramped office, smelling of old paper and coffee. Everything. All 850 acres. The cabin, mineral rights, water rights, it all came to me. There was also a letter, handwritten in Garrett's careful script, sealed with my name on it. I didn't open it until I was alone in my apartment. When I did, I had to sit because the words hit harder than expected. Dakota, this land is yours now. I trust you'll protect it the way our family always has. There will be challenges, people who test your resolve. But I believe in you. The property documents are in the safe. Combination is your mother's birthday. Don't let anyone tell you this place doesn't matter. It matters more than money. More than convenience, more than whatever arguments they'll make. Stand firm. Love, Garrett. I read it 3 times, folded it carefully, decided I needed to go back. I hadn't been to the ranch in 6 years, not since Garrett's health started failing. I told myself I'd assess the property, maybe decide whether to keep or sell it, but the truth was simpler. I needed to say goodbye properly. Walk the land one more time. Figure out what Garrett wanted me to understand. I took a week off work, loaded my truck with camping gear and basic geological survey equipment, made the 7-hour drive north. When I finally turned onto the dirt road marked Silver Creek Ranch private property, no trespassing, I felt something loosen in my chest. Inside the cabin, everything was frozen in time. Garrett's boots by the door, his jacket on a peg, a coffee mug still on the kitchen counter. I went to the bedroom where he kept the old safe, entered my mother's birthday. The door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside were documents. The original land grant from 1951, yellowed and fragile. The deed with our grandfather's signature. Tax records going back decades. And a folder marked surveys and boundaries. I pulled that one out first. Technical drawings, GPS coordinates, legal descriptions. There were also letters, recent ones from a law firm I didn't recognize. The first was dated 13 months ago. A formal notice about unauthorized surveying activity on the eastern parcel, requesting Garrett contact them immediately. A second letter, more urgent, threatening legal action. A third marked return to sender. I sat back, papers spread around me, felt the first cold thread of worry. Garrett hadn't mentioned any of this. He'd been sick, maybe too tired to fight, but he'd known something was wrong. That's why he'd written that letter. Why he'd told me to stand firm. I gathered documents, put them in my backpack, decided I needed to see the eastern boundary myself, the part near the lake where problems had supposedly occurred. I walked out and up the hill, behind the cabin, the one giving clear view of the entire property. From that vantage point, I could see everything. The forest, the long curve of the lake stretching east, and there, exactly where Garrett used to take me fishing, where we'd spent summer mornings in perfect silence watching the water, there was a structure that made my stomach drop. Not a cabin, not a shed, a mansion. 4 stories of modern architecture, all glass and steel, with an infinity pool reflecting sky, and around it a neighborhood of houses spreading like infection across land that should have been empty. I stood frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't encroachment of a few feet. This was development. A community built on my family's property. I pulled out my phone, took photos, checked survey maps against landscape. The eastern boundary was supposed to run along old stone markers placed in the 50s. I couldn't see them from here, but I knew where they should be. And unless I was completely wrong about basic geography, that glass house and half those residences were well inside my land. Way inside. Anger rose, hot and sharp. But also confusion. How did this happen? Who allowed it? Why hadn't Garrett been able to stop it? I thought about his letters, the ones marked return to sender, realized he'd tried. He'd tried and failed. Maybe that failure killed him faster than any heart disease. Standing there, looking down at stolen land, I understood what Garrett meant. This was the challenge. This was the test. And I wasn't walking away. The next morning, I woke to birds I'd almost forgotten existed. The kind of silence underneath their calls that only happens far from cities. I made coffee on Garrett's old stove, sat on the porch watching sun climb over the eastern ridge. Light hit the glass structure down by the lake, turning it into a beacon of wrongness. I'd spent half the night going through survey documents, cross-referencing coordinates, measuring distances on topographic maps. Garrett had kept meticulously updated. Every calculation confirmed what my gut knew. That development wasn't just close to my property line, it was deep inside it. At least 220 meters past where the boundary should have been. I loaded survey maps and handheld GPS into my backpack and started walking. The trail down to the lake was overgrown, but recognizable, winding through stands of pine and aspen Garrett had planted decades ago. But the illusion shattered when I reached the eastern meadow. The mansion dominated the shoreline, all sharp angles and floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind it, arranged in a neat semicircle, were other houses, smaller but expensive, each with manicured lawns and decorative fencing. A paved road connected them, smooth asphalt where there should have been wild grass and stone. I walked closer, following what should have been the property line according to my maps. The old boundary markers, chunks of granite with iron rods driven through their centers, should have been around here. I found one after 23 minutes of searching, half buried in brush, clearly untouched since the 50s. I marked it with GPS and kept walking. The next marker should have been 100 meters east, but when I reached that spot, I found something else instead. A brand new survey stake. Bright orange plastic with a metal tag stamped with a company name I didn't recognize and a date from last year. It was positioned wrong. Shifted about 330 meters west from where the actual boundary should have been. I stood staring at it, pulse quickening. This wasn't accidental. Someone had deliberately moved the property line, creating fake boundaries that pushed my land deeper into what looked like empty forest, making room for this development on acreage they had no right to touch. I documented coordinates and continued along the false boundary line. Found 3 more orange stakes, all placed with careful precision. All absolutely wrong. Between the fake markers and real ones were 16 acres of stolen land, the most valuable part of the ranch because they had direct lake access and southern exposure. I also found a sign, mounted on a decorative post near the paved road. Brushed aluminum with engraved lettering, Lakeside Haven Estates Private Community. Below that, managed by Lakeside Haven HOA. I stood reading it, feeling wrongness settle into my bones. This wasn't just someone building on my land by mistake. This was organized, official. Backed by an HOA, probably lawyers, whatever local officials signed off on permits. I walked down the paved road toward the houses. The development was quiet, most houses looking empty. But as I approached the mansion, a gate appeared, one of those automatic barriers rising from the ground. Beside it, a small guardhouse with a man in uniform inside. He stepped out, middle-aged, heavy-set, radio clipped to his belt. "This is a private community. Can I help you?" I stopped. I'm Dakota Reed. I own the land this community is built on. The guard's expression didn't change. "Sir, this is Lakeside Haven Estates. The HOA owns this property. If you have business here, contact the management office." "I don't need to contact anyone. This land's been in my family since 1951. You're standing on my property." The guard reached for his radio. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, or I'll call the police for trespassing." The irony being threatened with trespassing charges on my own land was almost funny. Almost. Before I could respond, a vehicle approached from inside. A black Range Rover with tinted windows. Expensive. Immaculate. It stopped at the gate, and a woman stepped out. She was maybe late 50s. Everything about her radiated control and confidence. The kind of person used to getting exactly what she wanted. She walked toward me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, more warning than greeting. But it was her appearance that struck me. She wore what looked like her signature, a crimson-red blazer, perfectly tailored, draped open over a black silk top with a deep V-neck, a matching pencil skirt with a subtle slit, red patent leather heels that clicked against pavement with authority. Her chestnut brown hair fell just past her shoulders in soft waves, and her lips were painted the same bold red as her jacket. "I'm Vivian Calloway, president of the Lakeside Haven Estates HOA." Her voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough edge. "Is there a problem here?" I looked at this woman standing on my stolen land, tried to keep my voice level. "I'm Dakota Reed. This development is built on property that belongs to me, 850 acres, including everything you're standing on." Vivian's smile widened, but her eyes stayed cold. "I think there's been some confusion. Lakeside Haven was properly purchased and developed 4 years ago. We have all necessary permits and documentation from the county. If you believe there's an issue with property lines, I suggest you contact your attorney. But I assure you, everything here is completely legal." She spoke with absolute certainty, like explaining something obvious to a child. I pulled out my phone, showed her the photo of the original survey marker. "This marker's been here since 51. Your development is 200 meters inside my boundary. The orange stakes someone put in last year are fake." Her expression didn't flicker. "Those are official survey markers placed by a licensed surveying company hired by the county. If you have different information, that's something you'll need to resolve through proper legal channels. But right now, You're on private HOA property without authorization, which makes this trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She said it so smoothly, with such practiced authority, I almost doubted myself for a second. Almost. But I'd spent years reading geological surveys, understanding land boundaries, interpreting technical documents. I knew what the map said. I knew where the real property line was. And this woman, with her perfect appearance and manufactured smile, was lying directly to my face. "I'll leave," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But this isn't over. Those stakes are fraudulent. This development is on my land. I'll prove it." Vivian tilted her head slightly, her smile turning almost pitying. "Mr. Reed, I understand you may have inherited some property nearby, but Lakeside Haven represents $43 million in investment and 48 families who've made their homes here. If you continue to harass this community, we'll have no choice but to pursue legal action against you. I'd hate for this to become unpleasant." The threat was delivered so politely, so reasonably, it took me a second to register what she'd actually said. She was threatening to sue me for trying to reclaim my own property. I looked past her at the mansion, at houses spread across land my grandfather had protected, that Garrett had fought to keep wild, felt something harden inside me. I turned and walked back the way I'd come, aware of Vivian watching the entire time, the guard standing ready with his radio. When I was far enough away, I pulled out my phone and called the only attorney I knew in Montana, a woman named Sophia Martinez, who'd handled some mineral rights cases for the survey company I'd worked with 2 years back. She answered on the third ring. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. When I finished, there was long silence. Then she said, "You need to come to my office. Bring every document you have. If what you're saying is true, this is bigger than a simple boundary dispute. This is fraud." I drove back to the ranch, gathered all papers from Garrett's safe, made the 40-minute drive to Whitefish, the nearest town with actual infrastructure. Sophia's office was above a coffee shop, small, cluttered with filing cabinets and stacks of legal books. She was maybe 38, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. She listened without interrupting. When I spread survey maps and property documents across her desk, she studied them carefully, making notes, cross-referencing dates. Finally, she looked up. "This is your land, no question. But they have building permits? Which means someone at the county approved this development. We need to find out how that happened. And we need to move fast." She explained adverse possession, the legal concept of claiming land through continuous occupation required 10 years in Montana. Vivian's development was only 4 years old, which meant she couldn't use that defense. But that didn't explain how she'd gotten permits in the first place, or who placed those fake stakes. Sophia laid out next steps. File formal complaint with the county. Hire independent surveyor to verify boundaries. Gather any correspondence Garrett might have had with officials. Prepare for what would likely be a long, expensive legal fight. She quoted a retainer fee of $6,000 with warning that total costs could reach $60,000 or more if it went to trial. I felt my stomach drop. But I didn't hesitate. Do it. Whatever it takes. Sophia scheduled our first official meeting for the following Monday, giving me the weekend to organize everything Garrett left behind. I spent 2 days in that cabin going through boxes I hadn't touched in years. Receipts for fence repairs, water rights documentation, correspondence with the county going back to the 80s. The sheer volume of paperwork told its own story. Garrett had been meticulous about maintaining records, proving ownership, documenting every interaction with officials. I found tax records showing continuous payment on all 850 acres. Never a gap, never a question about ownership. I found letters from developers he turned down, offers that would have made him wealthy, all politely declined with the same message. This land stays wild. Monday morning, I met Sophia at her office with 3 boxes of documents. She spent an hour going through them, occasionally stopping to read something twice. When she finished, she looked up with an expression that was part anger, part professional focus. "Your uncle tried to stop this." She showed me a series of letters Garrett had sent to the county planning office last year, formal objections to proposed surveying activity on his eastern boundary. Every single letter had gone unanswered. There was also a notice from a law firm representing the HOA, threatening legal action if Garrett continued to interfere with legitimate development activities. He tried to hire an attorney but couldn't afford the $25,000 retainer. The paper trail painted a clear picture. Garrett had known what was happening, tried to use proper channels, and been systematically ignored until he was too ill to keep fighting. Sophia organized everything into binders, explained our strategy. First, examine permits issued for Lakeside Haven at the county office. Second, hire independent surveyor to document boundary discrepancies. Third, understand who placed those fake stakes and why the county accepted them. We drove to the county offices that afternoon, a low brick building about 50 minutes from Whitefish. The land records office was in the basement, fluorescent lights buzzing. A clerk sat behind a desk looking like she'd been there since the building opened. Sophia approached with her professional smile. "We need to review survey records and building permits for Lakeside Haven Estates. Parcel number 483-5721. The clerk typed something, frowned. "Those records are currently under administrative review. They're not available for public access." Sophia's smile didn't waver. "These are public records. Under state law, we have a right to examine them." The clerk shrugged. "When records are flagged for review, they're pulled from the system. You'll need to come back in a few weeks." I felt frustration building. That specific kind of anger from bureaucratic stonewalling. Sophia leaned forward. "When was this review initiated?" The clerk checked her screen. "Last week." Sophia turned to look at me. I could see she was thinking the same thing. Last week, right after I'd confronted Vivienne at the gate, someone had locked down the records as soon as they knew I was asking questions. Sophia pulled out a business card, slid it across. "I'm filing a formal request under the Freedom of Information Act for those records. I need the name of your supervisor and contact information for whoever initiated this review." The clerk took the card reluctantly. "You'll have to submit that in writing." We left with nothing. The message was clear. They were going to make this as difficult as possible. In the parking lot, Sophia made a call to someone she described as the best surveyor in the state. A man named Griffin Hale, who'd worked boundary disputes for 38 years. She put it on speaker. He listened without interrupting. When Sophia finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I know the company that did that survey. They're based in Seattle. Showed up here 2 years ago, then vanished. I heard rumors they were paying well, maybe too well for basic boundary work. Send me coordinates of those orange stakes and the original property description. I can come out next week, but my rate is $350 an hour. This'll take at least 14 hours. I did the math, $4,900. Money I didn't have lying around, but I didn't hesitate. Do it." We returned to Lakeside Haven that evening, this time with Sophia as my legal representative. I wanted to try one more time to talk to Vivienne, present evidence, see if there was any chance of resolving this without court. The guard recognized me, expression hardening. Sophia handed him her business card. "We're here to speak with Mrs. Calloway regarding a property dispute. We have documentation indicating Lakeside Haven was built on land belonging to Mr. Reed." The guard made a call. Minutes later, Vivienne appeared with 2 other residents, both dressed expensively. Vivienne wore that same crimson blazer, black silk underneath, red heels clicking purposefully. Her chestnut hair caught the evening light. Lips the same bold red. Her smile was even colder than before. "Mr. Reed? I thought we'd resolved this. You were asked not to return." Sophia stepped forward. "Mrs. Calloway, I'm Sophia Martinez, Mr. Reed's attorney. We have documented evidence that the survey stakes used to establish boundaries of this development are incorrect. The actual property line places your community well inside Mr. Reed's legal boundaries. We're prepared to resolve this amicably if you're willing to discuss the matter." Vivienne glanced at the 2 people beside her. "We have all necessary permits issued by the county. Our survey was conducted by a licensed company. If Mr. Reed has issues with county records, that's a matter for him to take up with officials, not with this community. We're not going to entertain baseless claims from someone who shows up with old papers and makes threats. I pulled out the folder with the original land grant. This isn't old paper. This is the legal title to 850 acres, signed and recorded. Never contested, never sold. Your development is built on at least 16 of those acres. The survey stakes you're relying on were placed 300 meters inside my property line. That's fraud. The word landed hard. I saw Vivian's expression flicker for just a second, but it vanished quickly, replaced by that smooth authority. Mr. Reed, you're making very serious accusations without evidence. I suggest you and your attorney leave now. We have 48 families here. We will protect their interests vigorously. If you continue this harassment, we won't hesitate to file suit. One of the residents beside her spoke, voice carrying lazy confidence. Mrs. Calloway has been more than patient. You've trespassed multiple times. If you have a legitimate claim, file it in court. Otherwise, you're wasting everyone's time. Vivian turned and walked back toward the mansion, residents following. The guard stepped forward with his radio, making it clear we had no choice but to go. We left. On the drive back, Sophia was quiet. Finally, she said, "They're not going to negotiate. This is going to court, and it's going to be expensive and ugly." That night, I couldn't sleep. I checked community discussion boards online, local groups where people talked about county business. What I found made my stomach turn. Someone had posted about me, describing me as a man claiming to own Lakeside Haven, harassing residents, making threats. The comments below were almost uniformly supportive of Vivian, people praising her leadership, expressing concern about scammers, suggesting I should be arrested. A few mentioned that Vivian had donated money to the local school, helped fund a new hospital wing, sponsored youth sports. She was a pillar of the community, and I was nobody, just some outsider making trouble. I felt the weight of it, the isolation of standing alone against a system that had already decided I was wrong. But I also felt determination. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Garrett's letters, the ones where he tried to do the right thing and been ignored. I saw the ranch as it should have been. I saw those fake orange stakes driven into my land like an insult. Sophia had warned me this would be hard. She hadn't promised we'd win. But sitting there in the dark, reading comments from people who didn't know me and didn't care about truth, I understood something important. This wasn't just about property lines or money. This was about whether justice could exist when one side had power and the other side only had evidence. And I was going to find out which one mattered more. The next 4 days, I barely left the cabin, set up a makeshift office at Garrett's old kitchen table. Laptop open, documents spread across every surface. Started digging into public records with methodical patience I'd learned from years of geological surveys. If Vivian and her HOA thought they could hide behind bureaucratic walls, they hadn't counted on someone who knew how to follow paper trails, how to cross-reference dates and names until patterns emerged. I started with basics. Property records, business registrations, building permits that were technically public, even if the county was hiding physical files. Most of it was available online if you knew where to look. Buried in state databases and filing systems, most people never bothered to navigate. The first thing I found was the surveying company, the one that placed those fake orange stakes. It was called Callaway Geographic Solutions, registered in Washington State just 21 months ago. The name alone made my pulse quicken. I pulled up business registration, scrolled through corporate officers. There it was, Marcus Callaway, CEO and founder. Vivian's husband, the woman who'd stood at that gate telling me everything was legitimate, had hired her own husband's company to conduct the survey that stole my land. I sat back, staring at the screen, feeling that cold clarity that comes when suspicion turns into documented fact. This wasn't just fraud. This was a family business built on taking what didn't belong to them. I kept digging. Building permits for Lakeside Haven had been approved 16 months ago, filed with County Planning Office, signed by someone named Bradley Hutchins, Director of Planning. The approval had taken exactly 9 days from application to final signature, which, according to every source I could find, was impossibly fast. Normal processing time for a development that size was 7 months minimum. sometimes over a year when environmental reviews were involved. But Lakeside Haven had sailed through in 9 days. No questions asked, no delays, no public comment period. I made a note of the name, created a timeline, started looking for connections. Bradley Hutchins turned out to be 58 years old, a county employee for 27 years, recently retired with full pension. That by itself wasn't unusual, but when I cross-referenced his name with property records, something interesting appeared. 7 months ago, right around the time those building permits were being approved, Hutchins had purchased a house in Lakeside Haven. Not just any house, a custom-built residence valued at $920,000, purchased with cash according to the deed transfer. A county planning director making maybe $87,000 a year, buying a $920,000 house with cash in a development he just approved. The conflict of interest was so blatant, it almost seemed careless, like they hadn't even tried to hide it. I documented everything, took screenshots, created a folder of evidence that was starting to look less like a boundary dispute and more like systematic corruption. But I needed more. Needed to prove the connection between the Callaways and Hutchins. Needed to show money had changed hands beyond the house purchase that would require subpoenas. Bank records. The kind of discovery that only happened after filing a lawsuit. I called Sophia, walked her through what I'd found. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "This is bigger than I thought. We're not just proving your boundary is correct. We're proving county officials took bribes to approve a fraudulent development. That's criminal territory." 2 weeks later, Griffin arrived to conduct the official survey. He showed up in a truck loaded with equipment that looked like it belonged in science fiction. GPS receivers, accurate to centimeters, total stations for measuring angles and distances, ground-penetrating radar to find buried markers. He was in his late 50s. Weathered, precise. The kind of man who'd spent his entire career measuring Earth and trusted numbers more than words. I walked with him as he worked, watching him locate original stone markers, the ones placed in 51 that still stood exactly where they'd always been. He'd brought the original survey notes, yellowed pages with hand-drawn measurements and coordinates calculated before GPS existed. For 4 days, he moved across landscape, setting up instruments, taking readings, comparing modern technology to historical records. On the 5th day, he handed me a preliminary report. The numbers were devastating for Vivian. The mansion sat 238 meters inside my property line. 17 other houses ranged from 60 to 145 meters over the boundary. The fake orange stakes had been placed deliberately to shift the line west by 332 meters, stealing exactly 16.4 acres of the most valuable land on the ranch. Griffin's report included maps, photographs, GPS coordinates down to the centimeter, and a professional opinion that carried the weight of nearly 4 decades of experience. The survey markers placed by Callaway Geographic Solutions are fraudulent and bear no relationship to the legal property description recorded in 1951. The structures known as Lakeside Haven Estates are built entirely on land belonging to Dakota Reed. It cost me $4,900 I'd pulled from my retirement savings. It was worth every penny. Armed with Griffin's report, Sophia filed the lawsuit. The complaint was 72 pages long, meticulously detailed, naming Vivian Callaway, Marcus Callaway, Callaway Geographic Solutions, Lakeside Haven Estates LLC, and the county as defendants. It alleged fraud, trespass, unjust enrichment, and conspiracy to deprive me of property rights. We asked for injunctive relief to stop further construction, monetary damages for value of stolen land, attorney's fees. The filing fee alone was $575. Sophia estimated total cost to take this to trial could reach $65,000 or more. I had maybe $17,000 in savings total. But Sophia had a strategy. Once we served the complaint, we could request discovery, including subpoenas for bank records and internal communications. If we could prove bribery, the case became criminal and the district attorney's office might get involved. While we waited for defendants to be served, I kept investigating. I found something else in Garrett's papers. Something I'd missed the first time through. His original objection letter from 2 years ago. He'd sent it to the county, but he'd also sent a copy to the surveying company requesting clarification about their boundary markers. The letter had been returned marked undeliverable, but the envelope was still there with the address clearly written, Callaway Geographic Solutions, with a Seattle post office box. Garrett had tried to contact them directly. They'd refused to respond. More importantly, the date on the letter was 4 months before construction began, which meant they'd known the property owner was objecting and had proceeded anyway. I also found records of other landowners in the area. Using the county GIS system, I mapped properties adjacent to Lakeside Haven and started making calls. 3 of them older ranchers who'd been in the area for decades told similar stories. They'd lost small parcels, 7 or 12 acres each, to developments that claimed property lines were different than they remembered. None had money to fight it. One of them, a 73-year-old man named Vernon, actually broke down on the phone when I told him I was suing. I thought I was losing my mind, he said. Thought maybe I was just old and confused, but I knew that land was mine. I told him about Sophia, offered to help coordinate a joint case. He said yes immediately. The first response to the lawsuit came not from the Callaways, but from the county. Their attorney filed a motion to dismiss, arguing I should have raised these objections during the public comment period for development permits. The fact that there'd been no public comment period, that permits had been rushed through in 9 days, didn't seem to matter to them. Sophia filed a response pointing out exactly that, along with evidence that Garrett had tried to object and been ignored. The motion was scheduled for a hearing in 7 weeks. In the meantime, the Callaways hired a large law firm from Billings, the kind with 23 attorneys and offices in Glass Towers. Their response to the lawsuit was aggressive. They denied everything, claimed they'd purchased the land in good faith, filed a counterclaim accusing me of slander and harassment, demanding $2.3 million in damages. I read their counterclaim in Sophia's office, feeling a strange mix of anger and vindication. They were scared. If they weren't, they wouldn't be attacking so hard, wouldn't be trying to bury me under legal threats and outrageous damage claims. Sophia saw my expression and nodded. This is what they do. They try to make it so expensive and frightening that you give up. But we have something they don't. She tapped Griffin's survey report. We have the truth, and we can prove it. That night, I sat on Garrett's porch watching stars come out over the mountains, thinking about everything I'd uncovered. The fake survey company run by Vivian's husband. The county official who'd approved permits in record time then bought a house in the development. The pattern of stolen land from people too old or too poor to fight back. It wasn't just about my 850 acres anymore. It was about a system that had been corrupted, about people who thought power and money meant they could rewrite property lines and no one would stop them. Garrett had tried to stop them and failed. But he'd left me the tools I needed, the documents, the history, the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. I wasn't going to let him down. The preliminary hearing came 9 weeks after we filed the lawsuit. Judge Brennan presided with the kind of careful neutrality that gave nothing away. The county's motion to dismiss was argued first, their attorney standing in an expensive suit claiming I'd missed my opportunity to object during proper channels. Sophia stood up with a stack of Garrett's letters. The ones that had been ignored, the ones marked "Returned to Sender," placed them methodically on the judge's bench. Your Honor, my client's uncle attempted repeatedly to use those proper channels. He was systematically shut out. She walked through the timeline. Garrett's objections sent and ignored. The impossibly fast permit approval. The lack of any public comment period. When she finished, Judge Brennan flipped through the letters in silence, then looked at the county attorney. I'm denying the motion to dismiss. This case proceeds to discovery. It was a small victory, but it felt enormous. As we left the courthouse, Sophia explained what came next. Discovery meant we could compel defendants to produce documents, sit for depositions, answer interrogatories under oath. More importantly, we could subpoena bank records and internal communications. The Callaways would have to show how they'd acquired the land, who they'd paid, what they'd known about actual property boundaries. The process would take months, but we'd finally have access to evidence we needed. 3 weeks later, the subpoenas went out, and the real story started to emerge. The bank records arrived first. Thick packets of statements that Sophia and I spent days analyzing in her cramped office. The pattern was exactly what we'd suspected, but seeing it documented was different, more solid, more damning. Lakeside Haven Estates LLC had transferred $235,000 to Callaway Geographic Solutions 4 weeks before the survey that placed those fake orange stakes. The same LLC had made a payment of $62,000 to something called Mountain Advisory Services, which turned out to be a shell company registered to Bradley Hutchins' wife. The timing was surgical. Money moved. Survey happened. Permits approved. Construction started. It was a fraud scheme laid out in bank statements and wire transfers. Every transaction had a date and dollar amount that could be verified in court. Sophia scheduled depositions for everyone involved. Hutchins went first, sitting across from us in a conference room with his own attorney beside him, looking uncomfortable in a way that suggested he knew exactly how bad this looked. Sophia walked him through the timeline methodically, asking about permit approval, the unusual speed, the house purchase. He claimed everything was normal procedure, that the development had met all requirements, that his house purchase was unrelated to official duties. But when Sophia showed him the bank records, showed him the $62,000 payment to his wife's company, dated the same week he signed permits, his composure cracked. That was consulting work, he said. But his voice lacked conviction. What kind of consulting? Sophia asked. He couldn't answer clearly. Stumbled through vague explanations about advisory services, his attorney finally called for a break. Marcus Callaway's deposition was different. He came prepared, confident, with 2 attorneys flanking him and answers that sounded rehearsed. Yes, his company had conducted the survey. Yes, they'd used proper equipment and methodology. No, they hadn't been aware of any competing claims to the property. When Sophia asked about the $235,000 payment from his wife's LLC, he described it as standard fees for professional services. When she asked why survey markers were 300 meters off from the historical boundary, he claimed original markers must have been moved or damaged over time. It was smooth, practiced, almost believable if you didn't have Griffin's report proving every word was a lie, but he made one mistake. When Sophia asked if he'd received any communication from Garrett objecting to the survey, he said no. She showed him the letter Garrett had sent, the one marked undeliverable. This was sent to your company's registered address. Are you saying you never received it? He hesitated. Just for a second, that hesitation was enough. I don't recall that specific letter, he finally said. While the legal process ground forward, something unexpected happened. Vivian's daughter reached out to me through an anonymous email account. The message was short. I need to talk to you. What my mother did was wrong. I can help. I showed it to Sophia. She was immediately suspicious. Could be a trap. Could be them trying to gather information. But something about the message felt genuine. Desperate even. I responded with a time and place. A coffee shop in Whitefish. Public and neutral. The woman who showed up was 32, tired looking. The kind of face that showed she hadn't been sleeping well. Her name was Elena. She was a landscape architect. She designed the mansion grounds. We sat in a corner booth and she started talking before I could even ask questions. My mother told me the land was purchased legally, showed me permits, told me everything was approved. I designed those gardens believing it was legitimate, but after your lawsuit, I started asking questions. She wouldn't show me the purchase agreement. When I pushed, she told me to mind my own business, that she'd handled everything. So I went through her files when she wasn't home. She pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. There is no purchase agreement. She never bought the land. She just built on it, assuming no one would stop her because the owner was old and sick. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of internal HOA documents, meeting minutes where Vivian had explicitly told board members the eastern parcel has unclear ownership and is available for development. There were emails between her and Marcus discussing how to handle the boundary issue quietly. There was even a memo where she'd written Garrett Reed's objections should be ignored until he gives up or passes. Reading those words, seeing Garrett reduced to an obstacle to be waited out, I felt anger so pure it was almost clarifying. Elena watched my face. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. But once I found out, I couldn't be part of it anymore. I told her I'd testify if it came to that. She disowned me, said I was betraying the family. Sophia reviewed the documents that night and called me at 11:30, voice tight with controlled excitement. This is it. This is the evidence that breaks their case. Vivian's own words admitting she knew about Garrett's claim and chose to ignore it. Marcus's emails discussing how to manipulate the survey. We have them. She scheduled an emergency meeting with the district attorney's office, presenting everything we'd found. The DA was a serious woman in her mid-50s who listened without interrupting. Reviewed bank records. Read Vivian's emails. The mansion I sold to an environmental nonprofit for $3.4 million. They converted it into a research center focused on lake ecology and watershed management, exactly the kind of purpose Garrett would have approved. The money from the sale, combined with the court judgment, more than covered my legal fees. The remainder I donated to a legal fund for landowners fighting development fraud, and to the local school in Garrett's name. Vernon and the other ranchers who'd lost land to similar schemes used the precedent from my case to file their own lawsuits. 2 of them settled within months, getting their property back without trial. The third went to court and won. The pattern of fraud that had seemed invincible started collapsing as soon as someone stood up to it with evidence and refused to back down. Sitting in Sophia's office after the final settlement was signed, I felt the exhaustion of a fight that had lasted almost 15 months, drained thousands of dollars I didn't have, consumed every spare hour of my life. "Do you feel like you won?" Sophia asked. I thought about it, about Garrett, about the ranch, about justice versus satisfaction. I feel like I protected what needed protecting. That's not the same as winning, but it's enough. I returned to the ranch in early spring, exactly 1 year after I'd first discovered the mansion on my land. Snow had melted from lower elevations, leaving meadows green and scattered with wildflowers Garrett used to name for me when I was young. The old cabin looked the same, weathered logs dark with age, porch still sagging on one side, but I'd had it repaired over winter, roof patched, foundation reinforced. It wasn't fancy. It would never be fancy. But it was solid, honest, exactly what it had always been. I spent the morning walking the eastern boundary. Following the line where Griffin's survey had proven the real property markers stood, the fake orange stakes were gone, removed by court order. In their place were new markers, official ones installed by the county with coordinates that matched the original 51 survey. Walking that line felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen, not just land, but the principle that truth mattered, that documents and evidence and law could still protect the powerless from the powerful if you fought hard enough and didn't give up. The ranch itself needed work after years of Garrett's declining health and my absence. I hired Vernon's family to help manage the property. We repaired fences, cleared brush, marked trails for the public access portion I designated as conservation land. 120 acres along the western ridge, the part with the best views of the mountains, was now protected in perpetuity through a conservation easement. No development, no sale. Just wild land that would stay that way long after I was gone. Sophia visited one afternoon in late April. Driving out from town with a bottle of wine and a folder of final paperwork, we sat on the porch as the sun dropped toward western peaks. She walked me through the last documents: conservation easement filing, lease agreements with lakeside residents, deed clarifications that made my ownership explicit and uncontestable. Everything was signed, recorded, official. "It's over," she said, pouring wine into 2 glasses. "Legally, completely over. You can stop worrying." I took the glass, but I wasn't sure I knew how to stop worrying yet. 15 months of fighting had rewired something in my brain. making vigilance automatic. Did we do the right thing? I asked. With the leases? Letting people stay? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered all legal matters, weighing principles against pragmatics. Morally, yes. Those families were victims too. Vivian lied to them the same way she lied to everyone else. Practically, also yes. Forced demolition would have cost you hundreds of thousands in legal fees and made you look like the villain. This way you get income from leases. They get to keep their homes. Nobody has to tear down anything. She paused, sipped her wine. But the real question is, do you feel like justice was served? I watched the light change on the mountains, the way it turned snow on peaks gold, then pink, then purple. I think so. Garrett tried to stop this and failed. I finished what he started. The people responsible faced consequences. The land is protected. That's all justice really is, isn't it? Making things right when they've been made wrong. As spring turned to summer, I settled into a routine that felt like the life Garrett had lived. Working the land, maintaining boundaries, protecting what needed protection. I took a contract job doing geological surveys for environmental firms. Work I could do remotely with occasional field trips. It paid enough to live on, especially combined with lease income, and it kept me connected to the discipline I'd spent years studying. But mostly, I was here. On 850 acres that had been in my family for 7 decades, watching seasons change. Understanding why Garrett had turned down every offer to sell, this place had value that couldn't be measured in dollars, couldn't be captured on a balance sheet. It was continuity, legacy. Physical proof that some things could remain constant even as everything else changed. One evening in July, I took Garrett's letter out of the drawer where I'd kept it. Read it again by lamplight. The paper was getting soft from handling. Creases deep from being folded and unfolded so many times. This land is yours now. I trust you'll protect it. I'd done that. Not perfectly, not without cost, but I'd done it. The ranch was secure. Legally unassailable, conserved for the future. I walked outside and stood on the hill where I'd first seen the mansion, where the shock of that discovery had set everything in motion. The research center was dark now, quiet, scientists gone for the evening. The lake was smooth as glass, reflecting stars just starting to appear. I didn't know what the future held. Legal battles were over. But life continued, complicated and uncertain. Maybe I'd stay here permanently, become the kind of person Garrett had been, a steward more than an owner. Maybe I'd eventually find other work, other places, other purposes. But standing there in gathering dark, looking out over land that was finally, unquestionably, peacefully mine, I felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Not victory, not satisfaction, but something quieter and more lasting. I felt home. The ranch was here, exactly as it should be, protected and whole. And so was I. The fight was over. Justice had been served. And for the first time since Garrett's death, I could imagine a future that wasn't defined by what I'd lost, but by what I'd managed to keep. I turned and walked back to the cabin, where light from windows spilled out into darkness. Warm and welcoming. The door was open. I stepped inside. What do you think about my situation? Would you have had the strength to stand alone against an entire system that seemed designed to favor them? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.